Every day, somewhere in the world, firefighters, whether volunteer or career, are called upon to fight the incredibly violent and destructive force of Mother Nature known as the wildland fire. These fires in themselves can create their own weather patterns, generating huge columns of smoke and dangerously high flames. Wildland fires can also generate strong winds and unbearable temperatures. These conditions are unimaginable for the survival of life within this unforgiving environment. In an effort to protect firefighters from injury or death, specialized training in fire behavior is imperative. It is important that each wildland firefighter understands that injuries can occur due to the unforeseen hazards and risks associated with wildland fires. Firefighters know that death often lurks in the distance. Their personal safety hinges upon their field experience, training, and their complete understanding of fire behavior. In the heat of battle, a firefighter or a fire officer's misconception of impending fire behavior in a specific situation, coupled with inadequate safety practices, will most often lead to the injury or death of the wildland firefighter and/or crew. In order to prevent wildland fire fatalities, safety must be foremost in everything we do, along with the skilled understanding of how wildland fire behaves in its uncontrolled environment. Wildland fire is surprisingly predictable if you understand the basic physical principles of both fire behavior and fire chemistry. If you look close at most wildland fires, you can identify consistent fire behavior patterns within each incident. For example, when we apply three different yet common principles of fire behavior, wind, topography, and humidity, firefighters can predict that fire will travel faster uphill than downhill, with little or no wind present. Also, firefighters can predict, using the same fire behavior principles, when outside temperature decreases and humidity increases, wildland fires tend to be less active in their growth. Understanding the common physical principles of fire behavior can lead to safe and effective firefighting practices. Presented within this course are the two most important subjects, next to fire line safety, that a wildland firefighter can hold in his or her arsenal of knowledge. They are fire chemistry and fire behavior. The information learned in this course may someday save your life. The chemical reaction process, known as fire, begins at a temperature of just over 500 degrees Fahrenheit. In order for fire to begin the chemical reaction process, it requires fuel to burn, oxygen to support combustion, and heat to sustain the combustion process. Once fire begins, it uses oxygen from the air we breathe. This process is known as rapid oxidation. If you apply enough heat to any burnable material in the presence of oxygen, you will start a fire. Heat is the main factor in the start of any fire. Once a fire has started, it can produce its own life-giving heat. Some of the more common accidental heat sources associated with ignition sequences of wildland fires include sparks, engine exhaust, campfires, burn piles, and lightning. Other wildland fire starters common to illegal activities include matches, carelessly discarded cigarettes, and arson. In order to fully understand the full spectrum of fire behavior, we need to first review fire chemistry. Fire chemistry tells us which elements need to be present for fire to exist. There are three elements which must all be present before combustion can occur. These three elements include heat, fuel, and oxygen. Together, these elements create the chemical reaction process. Each element, heat, fuel, and oxygen, chained together in a series, makes up what is known as the fire triangle. The fire tetrahedron is diagrammed the same as the fire triangle. However, it contains a fourth element, defined as the chemical reaction process. The breakdown of the elements within the fire triangle or fire tetrahedron represent the modern-day concept of fire suppression. If you remove any single element of the fire triangle, fire cannot exist. The goal of modern firefighting in relation to the fire triangle is to break one or more of its sides as safely and efficiently as possible. For example, covering a fire with dirt, retardant, or foam removes the element of oxygen from the fire triangle and smothers the fire. Cooling it with water, retardant, foam, or dirt removes the element of heat. And as you dig a fire line down to mineral soil, you are removing the element of fuel, which stops the combustion process. These tactics are all based on the chemistry of fire. That is, fire needs heat, fuel, and oxygen chain together in order to sustain its chemical reaction and survive. Fire chemistry also deals with the movement of heat, a very important concept known as heat transfer. Heat can transfer to other objects in three ways: conduction, convection, and radiation. The first type of heat transfer is conduction. The conduction process begins when heat is transferred through a solid object from one point to another. One of the best known conductors of heat transfer is metal, such as a metal coffee pot. A metal coffee pot is a good conductor of heat. Heat from the fire creates the base of the coffee pot to get hotter and share its heat energy with its surrounding parts, eventually causing the water in the coffee pot to boil. If you attempt to pick up the coffee pot by its sides without using the handle, more than likely you'll get your fingers burnt. Wood or trees, on the other hand, are a poor conductor of heat because of their chemical makeup. Since trees are made of wood and wood is a better insulator than metal, it's unlikely that heat would travel from one tree to the other through the process of conduction. Rather, it is much easier for trees and aerial fuels to ignite utilizing the heat transfer process of either convective or radiant heat currents. Which brings us to the second process of heat transfer, convection. Convection occurs when the air surrounding the fire becomes heated, forcing the superheated gases to rise into the sky above the fire. The convection process can cause aerial fuels in the trees surrounding the fire to dry out and become preheated, therefore creating a deadly situation for even the most experienced wildland firefighter. Convectional currents carry superheated and flammable gases such as carbon monoxide well into the air above the tops of the material burning. This can result in the fire burning much higher than the tops of the trees themselves. On a wildland fire, it is the convectional currents which preheat the fuels ahead of the fire, creating updraft winds which channel the fire along hillsides, through saddles, and up box canyons. The third and final process of heat transfer, and most critical to the development of wildland fires, is radiant heat. Like conduction, radiation is a unique and independent form of heat transfer. Radiation refers to the transmission of electromagnetic waves of energy through space, better known as infrared rays. These waves of energy are not themselves hot, but are simply a particular frequency of pure electromagnetic energy. Therefore, radiation is fundamentally different from that of conduction. It merely describes the transfer of heat between two objects which are not in direct contact with one another. Radiation plays a major role in determining how a wildland fire will behave. How much heat an object radiates is strictly determined by its chemical properties, the temperature of the surrounding environment, and the mass or size of the object being heated. Unlike convection, radiation does not heat the air surrounding the fire. It heats everything facing it. It's the same effect as standing outdoors in the hot summer sun, soaking up the rays. Because radiant heat is so abundant in wildland fires, one of the most important aspects for a well-trained firefighter to understand is the fact radiant heat is most prominent between 1400 and 1800 hours. It is this time of day when the sun's rays are the hottest, humidity the lowest, and fuels are the driest. These conditions can favor extreme fire behavior. It is especially important for a firefighter to be aware that wildland fire can quickly generate dangerously high surface temperatures and unpredictable fire behavior in the mid-afternoon due to decreased humidity, drying winds, and increased temperatures. Also, it is important for the wildland firefighter to remember that superheated gases and temperatures generated by a wildland fire can quickly damage your lungs, which can cause the strongest of firefighters to suffocate. Two of the largest environmental factors in which a firefighter must face during a wildland incident are topography and fuel. Topography and fuel are the two key environmental components which influence fire direction, intensity, and speed. In today's modern techniques of fire suppression, firefighters utilize both the science of topography and fuel in an effort to stabilize uncontrolled fires in a safe and efficient manner. Each is used as a tactical tool to help predict the movement and spread of fire. The ability to accurately predict the course, development, and spread of fire is one of the most important skills a firefighter can develop in defense of his or her life. Wildland fires typically consist of very complex fire behavior. They are affected by the change in fuels, topography, weather, and ignition patterns. Diverse fire behavior produces equally different effects on the suppression of wildland fires when impacted by the topography of the incident. Topography can be divided into 4 classifications: slope, aspect, elevation, and configuration, or more commonly called lay of the land. Although fire cannot change topography, topography does have a dramatic influence on fire behavior. Within the elements of topography, slope plays a major role in the spread of fire. Slope and wind affect the movement of fire in 2 ways: by preheating the fuel above the fire and by creating an uphill draft effect. Fuels on the uphill side of a slope tend to ignite quicker when exposed to both radiant and convection heat currents created from the fire below. As heat rises along a slope from convection currents, it creates a draft effect which further increases the rate of fire spread. This increased rate of spread is primarily due to the preheating and drying of fuels ahead of the fire. This effect allows for direct flame contact on uphill fuels as it moves up and along the slope. Firefighters need to be careful when working on surfaces of slopes because gravity will cause burning materials to roll downhill and across control lines. Slope is one of the most common denominators of fatalities on a fire. A rule of thumb for firefighters to remember is, on a moderate slope of 30%, a fire's speed will double. On a steep slope of 55% or more, the speed of the fire will again double that of a 30% slope. As a wildland firefighter, slope should always be a major consideration when attempting a fire attack or building control lines. Never work on a slope above the fire.
Another thing I want to advocate for to a new firefighter is something that's changed in my career is downhill line construction. When I first started in the early 70s, it was just something we didn't do at all. It was unacceptable, and we took the time to go down and get on the bottom of the fire. In the last 15 years, I've seen a change to where we've tried to mitigate things. We've got downhill construction guidelines. We put up lookouts to keep us safe and downhill. As a new firefighter, I want you to resist as much as possible downhill line construction. It is never good to have fire below you. In my mind, there is hardly any tactical improvement to going downhill. It's a logistical improvement. Easy to get to the drop point from the road above, easy to fly the helicopter in to let people out at the helospots. But make sure that if you're going to do downhill line construction, that you've got somebody down below the lowest point of the fire to be able to account for that fire. If you don't do that, it's very dangerous, and I think we should resist downhill line construction as much.
When fighting fire or when constructing a control line along a slope flanking the edge of a wildland fire, it is likely you will encounter rolling or falling debris that is burning. Burning debris can easily start spot fires below you. Spot fires left unattended below you on a slope are not only very dangerous, but tend to grow into large fires very quickly. History has demonstrated that wildland firefighters have been killed attempting to outrun a fire on a slope. It is important for wildland firefighters to understand that fires that start at the bottom or toe of a slope generally become larger because of the greater amount of fuels available at the base of the hill. When a fire starts on a slope, it has the potential for developing substantial speed and momentum, often catching unsuspecting firefighters by surprise. Don't ever underestimate how fast a fire can move up a slope. Fires have been known to travel faster than 10 feet per second, which is more than double the speed of the average firefighter running up a hill. Underestimating the speed in which fire travels has led to the death of many firefighters attempting to outrun a wildland fire. The second category of topography identified within the elements of wildland firefighting is aspect or exposure. Aspect, or sometimes referred to as exposure, the direction the slope faces, affects the spread of fire in several ways. First, southern-facing slopes are more open to direct sunlight, so temperatures are normally higher and humidity is often lower than found in other areas. Second, fuel loads on southern-facing slopes are usually warmer and are much drier than other aspects of the mountain. However, this warming process changes each hour as the sun moves across the sky. It is important for the firefighter to recognize that each hour of the day may create different fire behavior patterns which are dictated by the angle of the sun and its ability to heat fuel loads differently during set times of the day. The specific aspect of a mountain also influences the type of natural vegetation present on a slope. The fuels commonly found on a southwestern exposure generally present the greatest fire hazard. This increased fire hazard is caused primarily by the slope's exposure to direct sunlight for longer periods of time. A fire which is located on the northern aspect of a mountain usually will burn slower, but will present greater resistance to fire control due to the predominantly heavier fuel loads which are present. When fighting any type of wildland fire, it is important to remember that slopes receiving direct sunlight will be hotter, increasing the flammability of the fuels. Also, it is important to consider the effect of elevation when attempting to predict the fire behavior of a wildland fire. The third category of topography identified within the elements of wildland firefighting is elevation. Elevation plays a major role in the way fire behaves. It first influences the way warm air moves up from the valleys to the cooler ridges above. Second, elevation can affect the positioning of the warm or cool air masses within the atmosphere. Third, it can impact the length of a fire season. And fourth, elevation determines what vegetation fuel types are present and how much fuel loading is available for the fire to burn. The fourth category of topography identified within the elements of wildland firefighting is configuration, or otherwise known as lay of the land. Configuration affects wind patterns. Canyons, saddles, and ridges have direct influence on how erratically a fire can burn. Narrow canyons are known for the development of wind eddies and strong upslope air currents, which can exist at sharp bends and intersecting draws. Firefighters must take special precautions when fighting these types of canyon fires. Narrow canyons with intersecting draws or forks can create very erratic fire behavior and can move and spread very quickly as wind currents develop in the draw. Surface winds in narrow canyons will normally follow the direction of the canyon, which may be different from that of the prevailing wind. A firefighter must understand when working in narrow canyons, radiant heat commonly creates spot fires which spread from one slope to another. The rate of spread of these spot fires can change dramatically when the fire backs down a canyon side and races up the other side of the draw. On the other hand, in wide canyons, prevailing wind direction will not be altered to any great extent by the direction of the canyon. However, significant wind differences will occur in wide canyons between general fire conditions on both the north and south aspects of any given mountain. Box canyons present yet another set of challenges for the firefighter. Fires which start near the base of a box canyon, also known as a chute, will react similarly to that of a fire started in a wood stove, moving gases and flame up the chimney. As with a wood stove, fresh air is drawn in from the bottom of the box, in this case a box canyon, creating very strong upslope drafts, while at the same time releasing fire and superheated gases towards the top and out the chimney or chute. It is important for the firefighter to remember this type of fire behavior draws the fire up the chute or chimney towards the ridge at a respectable rate of speed. As with any chimney effect, fire is rapidly being drawn up a chute, and it can occur at the heads of narrow canyons as well as high mountain valleys. A fire burning on level ground, up to 5% slope, will spread twice as fast when it reaches a 30% slope. The rate of spread will double again as the slope reaches 55% or greater. Unlike other canyon fire situations, fires burning along lateral ridges may change direction when they reach a point where the ridge drops off into a canyon. This change of direction is caused by the flow of air in the canyon. In some cases, a whirling motion created by the fire may result from a strong flow of air around the point of the ridge. Also, ridges may not only divide the terrain, but may have totally different wind conditions on each side of the ridge. This is especially true along coastal regions when weather patterns are changing. Simply stated, a mountain saddle is a deep U-shaped depression along a ridge. If a wildland fire spreads into a mountain saddle, it can be at best a challenging place to fight a wildland fire, especially trying to contain it. It is important to remember that an uphill fire can whip through a saddle faster than across any conventional ridgeline. Always flank a fire. Identify your safety zones, and maintain an awareness of changing or erratic wind conditions when working on a ridge, especially while working within an area of a saddle. Fuels can be classified as any material that can readily burn in a fire's path. Fuel characteristics determine the potential of the fire and its intensity, which directly influences the fire's rate of spread. Fuels associated with wildland fires are commonly divided into two main fuel groups: light or fast-burning fuels and heavy or slow-burning fuels. In addition, whenever discussing fuel groups, it is essential to recognize buildings within the urban interface as an additional potential fuel group. This specific fuel group has become more and more of a dominant issue as homes continue to be built within the urban interface arenas. Fuels can also be classified as to their position in the air or on the ground. Fuels such as small twigs, leaves, needles, and duff are all classified as ground fuels. Fuels such as grass, field crops, brush, and small trees are classified as surface fuels. Aerial fuels, on the other hand, are fuels which overhang and are suspended within the overhead canopy of the forest. Like an umbrella protecting the forest floor, aerial fuels are fuel types which include suspended fuels, large trees, or other vegetation. Aerial fuels also include both the needles and leaves which are attached to the branches of the trees within the forest. Light or fast-burning fuels, often called fine or flashy fuels, include dry grass, dead leaves, tree needles, brush, even small trees. Light fuels can cause a rapid spread of fire while serving as kindling for the heavier fuel loads. Some green fuels, such as tree needles, sage, scotch broom, and other green foliage, maintain a high level of oil content within their foliage, pods, or leaves. The oil contained within these types of light fuels spreads very quickly and produces excessively high temperatures when ablaze. Although light fuel types can move extremely fast, they are generally easier to extinguish. However, because of the spread, speed, and heat created by light fuels, do not ever underestimate the potential that this type of fire can display. A very high percentage of fire fatalities have been the result of underestimating the fire behavior characteristics of light fuels. Maybe that's why light fuels have acquired the nickname flashy fuels. Heavy or slower burning fuels include logs, stumps, branchwood, logging slash, and deep duff. Heavy fuels, which are dead in drying, generally burn readily and produce large volumes of heat. Heavy fuel loading creates conditions within the forested areas which are much harder to extinguish without sufficient resources. Also, in forested areas, heavy fuel loads are usually an accumulation of dead and downed fuels which burn very intensely, igniting other localized fuel loads of different sizes and shapes nearby. When reviewing wildland fuel groups, it is important to consider both the size and shape of the fuels. The shape and size of wildland fuels can affect how each type of fuel will ignite and burn. Smaller fuels contain a greater surface area than that of larger fuels and therefore take less effort to ignite. Just remember, it's easier to start a fire using kindling than it is to start a fire using a log. Small pieces of fuel require small amounts of heat to ignite. In comparing fire behavior patterns between small and large fuels, there exists 4 comparison variables: rapid moisture content change, less heating requirements, shorter burning periods, and increased spot fires. First, fuel moisture content changes occur more rapidly in smaller fuels than in larger fuels. Second, heat requirements to sustain ignition in smaller fuels is less than that found in larger fuels. Third, the burning pattern in smaller fuels is shorter than that of larger fuels. And fourth, spot fires start more readily in small fuels than in large fuels. When a wildland firefighter is faced with homogeneous fuel types, he or she should take extra precaution to assure personal safety. Homogeneous fuels are fuel loads which are uniform in height, size, and mass. They tend to grow in close proximity to one another and are evenly spaced. Due to their uniformity, homogeneous fuels offer no resistance to the spread of fire, as opposed to jackpot fuels, which are different in size and burn at a different rate of speed and temperature. Homogeneous fuels burn at the same rate and temperature, which can create extreme and unpredictable fire behavior. Ladder fuels are generally surface-type fuels which include limbs, brush, and young trees. Ladder fuels allow fire to climb up trees while extending to other laddering fuels in adjacent trees. This is more commonly known as a crowning fire. a fire jumping from tree crown to tree crown. The higher the intensity of the surface fire, the fewer ladder fuels are needed to move the fire into the crowns of trees. The spacing of the trees and their crowns can affect how easily a fire will move through the tops of trees. The tighter the spacing, the easier a fire can move up into the crown. The amount of moisture found in wildland fuels will affect how easily a fuel will ignite and how intensely it will burn. There are two types of fuel moisture: dead fuel moisture and live fuel moisture. The term dead fuel moisture content describes the moisture content found in dead fuel. The moisture content found in dead fuels is measured in percentage of weight and changes with the change in relative humidity. The term live fuel moisture content describes the moisture content found in living or growing fuels. The moisture content found in live fuels is also measured in percentage of weight, but changes with the growing cycle of the vegetation and varies greatly between species and seasons. Time lag is a term used to describe the time it takes for the moisture content of fuels and the surrounding air to equalize. It is expressed as a rate, usually in hours. For example, annual grass with a diameter of less than 1/4 inch contains a time lag of approximately 1 hour. Fuels with a diameter of 1/4 inch to 1 inch have a time lag of 10 hours. Logging slash or fuel of 1 to 3 inches is considered a 100-hour fuel. Logs and mature standing timber 3 to 8 inches thick reflect 1,000-hour fuels. Fuel moisture in lighter fuels can change within hours, so it is very important to be on the alert for extreme burning conditions when the relative humidity drops below 25% for 1-hour fuels, 7% for 10-hour fuels, and 13% for 1,000-hour fuels. Fire behavior potential when related to relative humidity can range anywhere between low ignition and extreme fire behavior. This is dependent on temperature, time of day, and fuel moisture content of any given fuel. For example, when relative humidity is up over 60% and the fuel moisture for 1-hour fuels is greater than 20%, there's very little chance of ignition. However, if the fuel moisture for 10-hour fuels is less than 15%, spotting may occur, specifically with winds gusting above 9 miles an hour. When relative humidity is less than 5% in all fuel types, sources of ignition are extremely dangerous. Erratic fire behavior should be predicted. Spot fires can also occur with a very rapid spread. In these dry conditions, critical burning is imminent. The wildland firefighter in this environment needs to be aware of the volatile conditions which exist. In review of the fire behavior potential versus the relative humidity chart, relative humidity and fuel moisture greatly impact the fire behavior potential of fuels. Understanding the relationship between fuel moisture and the probability of fuel ignition allows the wildland firefighter to predict burning conditions. You should possess this knowledge prior to committing fire personnel into an area which contains extreme and unpredictable fire behavior. As a wildland firefighter, it is extremely important that you study the fire behavior of any given fire situation and adjust your fire suppression tactics to match the situation. Remember, safety is the #1 priority in everything we do in wildland firefighting. Fuel types change slowly over time. However, the potential of fire behavior can change dramatically in any specific fuel type from one season to another or from year to year. Topography, on the other hand, does not change dramatically from year to year, thus is relatively static. However, topography can affect fuel types and the way they are presented in wildland fire incidents. Wildland fuel types can change in respect to elevation, aspect, and human intervention, such as logging, plantations, and housing developments, all of which affect fuel types and loading. Fuel loading is the amount or volume of fuel available for fire to burn. For example, lack of fire in an area will cause a buildup of fuels. Year after year, leaves and underbrush will pile up, creating a thicker fuel load. Depending on the fuel moisture content, an increase in the amount of fuel increases a fire's intensity. Therefore, a hot, intense fire can greatly increase the resistance to fire suppression efforts and fire control. Fuel loading is measured by tons to the acre. Grassy fuels usually range from 1 to 5 tons to the acre. Brushy fuels can range from 20 to 40 tons to the acre. Slash can run anywhere from 30 to 200 tons to the acre, and timber can vary between 100 to 600 tons per acre. As has been stated earlier, heavy fuel loading can increase a fire's intensity. A light grass fire can be easier to control than a fire in thicker fuel loads under the same conditions. Heavy fuel loading increases resistance to control. Our final fuel characteristic is fuel temperature. The warmer the fuel temperature, the less heat it takes to ignite it. This is very important when dealing with lighter fuels. Their lack of mass allows them to heat up and dry out faster than heavier fuels. Fuel temperature is changed by solar radiation. There can be as much as a 50 to 80 degree difference between the surface temperature of a fuel in the sun to that in the shade. Likewise, there is a similar corresponding difference in their respective fuel moisture content. And remember, since fire is a chemical reaction, its speed doubles with every rise in temperature of 18 degrees Fahrenheit. This can greatly influence both the fire's intensity and its rate of speed. Two of the biggest factors in the relationship between solar radiation and surface temperature is the time of day and the topographical aspect. Surface temperature on a western aspect is going to change drastically from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. For example, say the temperature on a western aspect is 60 degrees at 8 a.m. By 2 p.m. the temperature is now 96 degrees. Knowing that the chemical reaction known as fire doubles with an increase of every 18 degrees Fahrenheit, if the weather conditions remain constant, the rate of speed on the same slope during a 6-hour period can quadruple. As we have discussed throughout this course, fire is influenced by many environmental factors. Most of these seem subtle, but can have a major impact in their overall effect on a fire. As discussed earlier, the key to predicting fire behavior is understanding how each of the environmental factors combine and change over time. Remember, the fire triangle is the heart of the combustion process. Therefore, removing any one side of the fire triangle, the fire goes out. We discussed the three methods of heat transfer, including conduction, convection, and radiation. It is within these three heat transfer processes that fire can spread. We stated that the principal environmental elements which affect wildland fire behavior through topography include aspect, elevation, and configuration. As further discussed throughout this course, fuel groups play an important role in the factors which impact the start and spread of wildland fires. These include both light and heavy fuel loading conditions, which influences whether the fire will burn fast or slow. In the next section of fire behavior, we will be discussing the topic of weather and how it impacts fire behavior and its predictability, which is the third major environmental factor that can impact fire behavior. The key to predicting fire behavior is understanding how all the environmental factors influence one another, and how each can aid in the uncontrollable spread of fire. Your ability to predict fire behavior will be one of your most valuable safety tools. Use it wisely, consistently, and constantly. The life you save may very well be your own.